The wind screamed around Coldwynd Keep like a dying thing. Inside the great hall, the Lord's voice was a blade of ice. "You have taken my home," the widow said, her chin lifted, her dark gray eyes holding his without flinching. Lord Theron Coldwynd looked down at the slender, mud-spattered woman and her 2 shivering boys. "I have taken nothing that was not already mine," he replied, his greenish-gray gaze devoid of mercy. "Your poor planning is not my emergency. For the sake of my boys," she whispered, the plea tearing from her. "Do not cast us out to die." A moment of heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the child's whimper. Then the Lord pronounced his judgment. "Godfrey, the kitchens are short-handed. Put her to work. She and her brats can sleep in the storeroom. They are not to set foot in the main keep." He turned away, a lord dismissing a problem. He never imagined it was the beginning of his own surrender. The wind that swept down from the fells and into the courtyard of Coldwynd Keep was a knife of ice. It was a late November day, the sky the color of bruised slate promising the first true snow. Lord Theron Coldwynd stood at the high window of his solar, a carved goblet of wine in his hand, looking down at his domain. The stark, unforgiving beauty of the Yorkshire moors in winter suited him. It was a landscape that demanded strength and punished weakness, principles he held as gospel. A commotion at the gatehouse drew his eye. His steward, Godfrey, was speaking with a woman. Even from this distance, Theron could see she was a commoner, wrapped in a threadbare cloak. She was not cowering. Her posture was straight, and she seemed to be arguing with Godfrey, who made a dismissive gesture and turned away. The woman took a step forward, and one of the guards roughly shoved her back. She stumbled but did not fall. A spark of irritation, hot and unwelcome, flared in Theron's chest. The insolence of the lower classes, always believing their petty troubles were worth a lord's time. He turned from the window as a knock came at his door. Godfrey entered, his face pinched with annoyance. "My lord, my apologies for the disturbance." A tenant woman, the widow from Hawthorne Cottage. "She is making a scene." "Hawthorne Cottage?" Theron's voice was flat. He took a sip of wine. The name meant nothing to him. "The one on the western edge of the estate, my lord. We reclaimed it a fortnight past for the new kennel master. The widow was months behind in rent. She has 2 infant boys." Theron waved a hand, his strong fingers curling around the stem of the goblet. "Then the matter is settled. She had her chance to pay. Sentiment has no place in estate management, Godfrey. You know my views." "Indeed, my lord. But she is persistent. She claims she has nowhere to go. She begs an audience. Begging is what they do best," Theron said, his greenish-gray eyes cold. "They are like children, believing tears will move a mountain. Send her away. If she causes more trouble, have her thrown into the stocks for a day. That will cool her fervor." Godfrey bowed and retreated. Theron returned to his window. The woman was gone from the gatehouse. A small, satisfied smirk touched his lips. Order was restored. But an hour later, as he descended to the great hall for the midday meal, he found that order had been profoundly disrupted. The woman was there. She had somehow slipped past the guards and now stood just inside the vast entrance, her presence a stain on the polished stone floor. Her cloak was damp, her boots caked in mud. She held the hands of 2 small, shivering boys who hid behind her skirts, and then she looked up. Theron stopped mid-stride. She was younger than he expected, perhaps 8 and 20. Her face was pale and etched with exhaustion, a fair complexion made stark by the chill. A spray of freckles stood out across her nose and cheeks. Her long auburn hair was coming loose from its braid, strands of it plastered to her temples by the damp. But it was her eyes that held him captive, dark gray, wide and mesmerizing in their intensity. They were not pleading, they were accusing. Before Godfrey or the guards could seize her, she spoke, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the household. "Lord Coldwynd, I am Meredith, widow of John the Carter. You have taken my home." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to the Lord. Theron felt a hot flush of anger rise up his neck. To be challenged so in his own hall by a peasant. He walked towards her, his boots echoing in the silence. He stopped a few feet away, his 6-foot frame towering over her slender one. He could smell the cold air on her clothes, the faint scent of wood smoke and desperation. "I have taken nothing that was not already mine," he said, his voice low and dangerous. You failed to pay your rent. The cottage was part of my estate. It is now occupied by a man who provides a useful service. Your poor planning is not my emergency." Her plump, beautiful lips tightened. "The fever that took my husband also took the coin we had saved. I have offered to work the debt off. I can read. I can write. I can keep accounts. But I was given no chance. Your men came and put my sons and me out into the cold." One of the toddlers began to whimper, burying his face in her skirts. The sound grated on Theron's nerves. It was a weapon he knew, a manipulative ploy. "Your skills are of no use to me. A woman who cannot keep a roof over her children's heads has no business boasting of her learning." The cruelty in his words was deliberate, a shield against the unwelcome prick of something that felt uncomfortably like shame. He saw the blow land, a flicker of profound hurt in those dark gray eyes, quickly extinguished by a flame of pure defiance. She took a step closer, her gaze not wavering from his. "You speak of useful service, my lord? What service is there in letting a mother and her children freeze to death for the crime of poverty? Is that the justice of Coldwynd? To punish the desperate?" The audacity of her was staggering. He could feel the stunned silence of his household. No one spoke to him this way, no one. He was tempted to backhand her, to wipe that defiant look from her face. But something held him back, the sheer raw courage it took to stand before him with nothing and speak truth to his power. "Your justice is my will," he snarled, leaning in so only she could hear. "And my will is that you leave my hall now." "For the sake of my boys," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. "They are innocent in this. Give me a chance. Any chance. I will scrub your floors. I will work in your kitchens. Just do not cast us out to die." Her head bowed slightly, not in submission, but in a gesture of raw maternal plea. For a fleeting second, he saw not an impudent peasant, but a woman fighting for her children's lives. The image of her, proud and broken all at once, unsettled him deeply. His hatred for the lower class was a core tenet of his being, built on a foundation of their laziness, their deceit, their unworthiness. She was not fitting the mold. "Godfrey," Theron barked, stepping back as if her proximity burned him. "The kitchens are short-handed since the scullery maid ran off. Put her to work there. She and her brats can sleep in the storeroom by the hearth. They are not to set foot in the main keep." See to it, he did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and strode away, his chestnut brown curls shifting on his shoulders. He felt her gaze on his back like a brand. He had not given in out of compassion, he told himself fiercely. He had done it to quell a disturbance, to prove his magnanimous control. He had put her in her place, the kitchens, a level above the dogs. It was where she belonged, but as he took his seat at the high table, the taste of his wine was suddenly bitter. The memory of her freckled face and those mesmerizing storm-gray eyes haunted him. She was a problem he had not yet solved, a challenge to the ordered world he ruled. And Lord Theron Coldwynd, for the first time in a long time, felt the disquieting stir of something other than contempt. The storeroom off the kitchen was a realm of shadows and sighs. It was dry, and the residual heat from the great ovens kept the worst of the chill at bay. But it was a world away from the home Meredith had lost. Her days began before dawn, and ended long after the moon had risen over the keep's battlements. She scrubbed pots until her hands were raw and red, carried buckets of water that strained her slender frame, and swept floors under the critical eye of the sour-faced cook. Iseult, her two boys, Thomas and Liam, stayed in the corners of the bustling kitchen, their wide eyes taking in the strange, noisy world. They were quiet, too quiet, the boisterous spirit of childhood dimmed by fear and displacement. Meredith's heart ached for them every time she saw them flinch at a raised voice. This was not the life she had wanted for her sons. Lord Theron Coldwynd made a point of avoiding the kitchen wing. Its smells of onion and sweat, its cacophony of clattering pans and common chatter, were an affront to his senses. Yet he found his path taking him through the adjacent servants' hall more frequently than necessary. He told himself he was inspecting the household's efficiency, ensuring his unexpected and unwanted charity was not being abused. He would see her, always working. Her long auburn hair was always tightly braided now, a practical measure, but a few stubborn strands would escape, curling softly around her freckled cheeks in the steam. He watched the way she moved, a quiet efficiency in her slender body that contrasted with the clumsy haste of the other servants. She never looked at him directly during these moments, but he felt her awareness of him like a physical touch. It was infuriating. One afternoon, a fortnight after her arrival, he was in the yard inspecting a new shipment of iron ingots when he heard a child's wail of terror. He turned to see Meredith's younger boy, Liam, frozen in the path of a heavily laden cart, the driver oblivious. In a flash of gray wool, Meredith was there. She snatched the boy up, spinning out of the way just as the cart rumbled past, the wheel missing them by a hand's breadth. She stood, clutching her sobbing son, her own body trembling. Her gaze lifted and collided with Theron's across the yard. Her dark gray eyes were wide with residual fear, her fair complexion paler than usual. For a single, unguarded moment, he saw the raw, primal love and terror of a mother. It was a force so powerful it seemed to vibrate the air between them. Then, just as quickly, her mask of stoic resilience slid back into place. She dipped her head in a curt nod and hurried back towards the kitchen, soothing the boy. Theron stood rooted to the spot, the image seared into his mind. The vulnerability, the speed of her reaction, the sheer force of her will to protect. It was admirable. The thought was like a splinter in his mind. He could not admire a peasant. He despised them for their weaknesses, and here he was admiring a display of what was, at its core, a base, animal instinct. He shook his head as if to dislodge the notion, and returned to his ingots with a scowl deeper than before. The incident, however, had cracked the door open, and try as he might, he could not shut it. He began to notice things. He noticed how the other servants, initially wary of her, had begun to seek her out. He saw a stable boy shyly showing her a bruised finger, and her taking the time to clean and bind it with a strip of clean linen. He saw her, late one evening through a half-open doorway, teaching her older boy his letters by drawing them in the ashes by the hearth, her voice a soft, patient murmur. It was this last sight that unsettled him most. Literacy was a mark of nobility, of the clergy, of the merchant class, not of a kitchen drudge. It was a dissonance that challenged the very foundations of his worldview. She was an irregularity, a puzzle he felt compelled to solve, even as he resented the compulsion. The final, damning incident occurred on a day of relentless, icy rain. Theron was in his solar, reviewing a dispute over land boundaries with a neighboring knight. Sir Edric, the man, was a boor, loud and entitled, and Theron was fast losing patience. "The stream is the marker, Coldwynd. It always has been," Sir Edric boomed, slamming a meaty fist on the table. "Your shepherd is grazing his flock a full half-mile onto my land. The stream changed its course after the spring floods, as you well know," Theron replied, his voice tight. "The original boundary is marked by the old standing stone. The land is mine." The argument was circular and tedious. They had maps, but they were crude, drawn by a long-dead monk, and their interpretations differed. The tension in the room was as thick as the peat smoke from the fire. Agnes entered to replenish the wine. As she left, she muttered under her breath to the guard at the door, just loud enough for Theron to catch. "Wish that Meredith were here. She's got a head for this. She'd have it sorted." Theron's head snapped up. "What did you say?" Agnes paled, curtsying deeply. "Nothing, my lord. Forgive me." "The woman, Meredith, you said she has a head for this?" She helps with the kitchen tallies, my lord. Sees patterns others miss. It was just a foolish thought." Sir Edric laughed, a coarse, grating sound. "You consult your scullery maids on matters of land now, Coldwynd. How modern of you." Humiliation, hot and sharp, burned through Theron. To be mocked in his own home, and because of her. His rage was immediate and absolute. "Bring her," he commanded the guard, his voice dangerously quiet. Minutes later, Meredith was ushered into the solar. She was wiping her hands on her apron, leaving smudges of flour on the gray wool. She looked from Theron's thunderous expression to the smug face of Sir Edric and back, her own face carefully neutral. "My lord?" she said. Theron thrust a finger at the vellum map on the table. "This, woman," he said to Sir Edric, the word a curse, "is here to settle our dispute since she is apparently so gifted." He turned his greenish-gray eyes blazing with contempt onto Meredith. "Well, where's the boundary? Am I a thief, as Sir Edric claims?" Meredith approached the table slowly. She did not look at the men, but studied the map. Her slender fingers, still dusted with flour, traced the lines of ink. She looked at the depictions of the stream, the standing stone, the hills. She was silent for a long time, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sir Edric snorted. "This is a waste of time. She cannot even read it. The stream is drawn with a heavier hand here," Meredith said, her voice clear and steady, pointing to a spot on the map. "And the hills are shown with more detail on this side. The monk who drew this was standing on your land, Sir Edric, looking towards Lord Coldwynd's. His perspective skewed the distances. The standing stone is the true marker. The land is Lord Coldwynd's." The silence in the room was absolute. She had not just read the map. She had interpreted the cartographer's intent. Her reasoning was irrefutable. Sir Edric's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He had no rebuttal. The evidence was there, seen through the eyes of a kitchen widow. Theron stared at her. The fury was still there, a hot coal in his gut, but it was now mixed with something else, something terrifying and profound, a staggering, unwilling respect. She had not just solved the problem. She had humiliated his opponent with a quiet intelligence that left no room for argument. She had defended his claim, his property, with more acuity than he himself had managed. "Get out," Theron said to Sir Edric, not taking his eyes off Meredith. Sputtering, the knight gathered his things and left. The door slamming shut behind him, Theron and Meredith were alone. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. He walked around the table until he was standing before her, so close he could see the individual freckles across the bridge of her nose, see the dark gray depths of her mesmerizing eyes, which held no triumph, only a weary apprehension. He had never felt so conflicted. He wanted to shake her for causing this turmoil within him. He wanted to thank her for defending what was his. The war between his ingrained hatred and this new, unwelcome admiration was a tempest in his soul. He said nothing. He simply reached out, not to touch her, but to brush a trace of flour from the sleeve of her dress. The gesture was intimate, possessive, and utterly confusing to them both. His fingers hovered for a second before he pulled his hand back as if burned. "Return to your work," he commanded. His voice rough. She curtsied and left without a word. But the air in the solar was charged, forever altered. Theron turned to the window, watching the icy rain sheet down. He could still see the ghost of her finger tracing the map, still feel the phantom touch of coarse wool under his fingertips. Something had shifted deep within the fortress of his heart, a stone dislodged in the foundation. And he, Lord Theron Coldwynd, who hated the lower class, did not want to admit it was the beginning of a very dangerous fall. The shift in the air after the map incident was imperceptible to all but the two of them. For Meredith, the Lord's silent, almost touch was more unsettling than his open contempt. It was a question without an answer. A door cracked open in a wall she had believed was impenetrable. She found herself hyper-aware of him, her skin prickling when he entered a room, her gaze drawn to the broad set of his shoulders in his lordly tunics. She hated the feeling. It was a betrayal of her husband's memory, a dangerous folly for a woman in her position. Theron, for his part, waged a private war. He doubled down on his stern demeanor, his commands to the household becoming even more clipped. He avoided the kitchen wing entirely, yet he began to summon Godfrey for reports on the estate's accounts. With a new nitpicking frequency, questions on his lips that he knew. With a sinking feeling only one person could answer accurately. He was creating excuses to engage with her intellect, all while telling himself he was merely using an available tool. The tension between them was a low, steady hum, like a tightened lute string waiting for a pluck. It snapped on a market day, a fortnight later. Meredith had been given a rare hour of freedom to take her boys to the village outside the keep's walls. The sun was weak but welcome, and for a brief moment, watching Thomas and Liam chase a chicken, she felt a flicker of her old self. The feeling died a swift death when a familiar voice called her name. "Meredith? By God's grace, it is you." She turned, her blood running cold. Standing before her was Alaric, a burly man with a carpenter's strong hands and a face that had once been kind. He was her late husband's friend, and before her marriage, he had been her hopeful suitor. "Alaric," she said, her voice carefully neutral. She pulled her boys closer to her skirts. "I heard you lost your cottage," he said, his eyes sweeping over her worn dress, the thinness of her children. There was pity there, but also a possessiveness that made her skin crawl. "I looked for you. I would have offered you my protection sooner." "We are managing," she said, taking a small step back. "Managing? As a servant in the cold lord's kitchen?" He shook his head, stepping forward. "Meredith, this is no life for you. For them. John would have wanted you cared for. You know my feelings for you never faded." Panic, cold and sharp, began to climb her throat. "Alaric, please. I have a good trade, a solid house." He pressed on, his voice gaining confidence. "I can give you and the boys a proper home, the security you need. It is a sensible match." It was then that a shadow fell over them. Lord Theron Coldwynd stood a few feet away, having just dismounted from his horse. He had seen the entire exchange. His face was a mask of cold stone, but his greenish-gray eyes were alive with a fire she couldn't name. He had heard the man's proposition. "Is there a problem?" Theron's voice cut through the market chatter, low and dangerous. Alaric, startled, bowed clumsily. "My lord, no problem. I was just speaking with Mistress Meredith. We are old friends." Theron's gaze slid from Alaric to Meredith, taking in her pale, strained face. "She appears distressed." "I was merely asking for her hand, my lord," Alaric said, puffing out his chest slightly. "A business matter." "A business matter," Theron repeated, the words dripping with disdain. He took a step closer, his height and noble bearing making Alaric seem to shrink. "The woman is in my employ. Her time is my commodity. You are disrupting it." "My apologies, my lord, I only meant—" "I know what you meant," Theron interrupted, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You see a vulnerable woman and you see an opportunity to acquire, like a piece of livestock." His eyes flicked to Meredith again, and for a heartbeat she saw something raw and furious in them. Not at her, but for her. "She is not available for acquisition." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Alaric stared, confused and intimidated. Meredith felt the world tilt. "She is not available." What did that mean? "My lord, I have every right," Alaric began, but Theron cut him off with a look. "You have no rights where my household is concerned. Leave. Now. If you approach her again, you will find your trade licenses within my lands revoked." It was a brutal, disproportionate display of power. Alaric's face flushed red with humiliation and fear. He shot a last bewildered look at Meredith, then turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. Silence descended upon the spot. The boys clung to Meredith, frightened by the intensity of the lord. Theron stood before her, his chest rising, and falling with a rhythm that was just a little too fast. The fury was still on him, a palpable heat. "My lord," Meredith whispered, her voice trembling. "You did not have to." "Did you wish to go with him?" Theron asked abruptly, his gaze intense, searching her face. "Did you wish to be that man's sensible match?" The question was an invasion. It demanded a truth she wasn't sure she could give, even to herself. "I wish for safety for my children," she said, evading, "but not at the cost of my freedom." He studied her for a long moment, the storm in his eyes gradually receding, replaced by that unsettling, unwelcome respect. "Then it is settled." He turned to leave, but Meredith found a spark of her own defiance. "Why?" she asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. He paused, his broad back to her. "Why what? Why did you intervene? It was not your affair." Theron half turned, his profile sharp against the gray sky. The answer was a war within him. He could say it was because she was his servant, and her distress was a reflection on his household. He could say it was because he disliked the man's manner. Both would be true, and both would be lies. He chose a different truth, one that was safer yet more damning. "A mind like yours," he said, his voice rough, "should not be buried in some carpenter's house, bearing his children and forgetting its own light. It is a waste of a resource." And with that he walked away, leaving her standing in the market more confused and unsettled than ever. He had not claimed her out of desire, but out of a cold, intellectual appraisal, a waste of a resource. The words should have insulted her. Instead, they felt like the highest compliment he was capable of giving. And the way he had looked at Alaric. It hadn't been the look of a lord protecting a resource. It had been the look of a rival. That night, in the silence of his solar, Theron poured a generous goblet of wine. He replayed the scene in the market, the carpenter's possessive tone, the fear in Meredith's dark gray eyes, the surge of pure, undiluted rage he had felt at the thought of her belonging to another man. It was a possessive, primal instinct he had no name for, one that had nothing to do with class and everything to do with the fact that she, Meredith, with her freckles and her mesmerizing eyes and her infuriatingly sharp mind, was his. The realization was a catastrophe. It upended everything. He was Lord Theron Coldwynd. She was a kitchen widow, and he was, against all reason and will, beginning to fall for her. The air in Coldwynd Keep became a taut wire, strung between the Lord's solar and the kitchen, humming with a tension that was both agonizing and addictive. For Theron, the admission he had forced from his own soul was a catastrophe. He, Lord Theron Coldwynd, who had built his identity upon a foundation of superiority and contempt, was now prey to a relentless, undignified obsession. It was a physical ache, a constant awareness of Meredith that buzzed beneath his skin. He could be in the stables smelling hay and horse, and his mind would conjure the faint scent of lavender that clung to her in the steam of the kitchens. He could be listening to a tenant's grievance, and his thoughts would drift to the sharp, quiet logic she had used on the map. He waged a private war, a brutal campaign against his own nature. He doubled down on his stern demeanor, his commands to the household becoming even more clipped. He avoided the kitchen wing entirely, yet he began to summon Godfrey for reports on the estate's accounts with a new, nitpicking frequency, asking questions he knew, with a sinking, furious feeling only one person could answer accurately. He was creating excuses to engage with her intellect, all while telling himself he was merely using a tool, testing a resource. Every interaction was a battle he lost, a small piece of his fortress chipped away. Meredith felt it too, the weight of his silent, burning attention. It was a different kind of siege, more terrifying than his open contempt. Where before there had been a clear enemy, now there was a simmering intensity that promised either destruction or salvation, and she dared not hope for the latter. His words in the market, a waste of a resource, echoed in her mind. They were the words of a man who saw her as a thing. Yet the memory of the protective fury in his eyes when he faced Alaric spoke of something far less clinical, something that made her heart trip in a frantic, dangerous rhythm. The breaking point came with a true storm. For 2 days, the wind howled around the stone walls like a vengeful spirit, and a freezing rain fell in relentless, blinding sheets. On the second night, a fever swept through the lower levels of the keep, felling several servants, including the cook, Agnes. In the chaos and the eerie greenish light of a sick room, Meredith's worst fear was realized. Her younger son Liam was taken ill, his small body burning like a furnace, his cries weak and pitiful. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped her. The castle physician was attending to Theron's own huntsman, who was deathly ill, and would not come for a scullery maid's child. Desperation overriding all protocol and fear, she wrapped Liam's listless form in a thin blanket, and holding her coughing older boy by the hand, fled the storeroom. She did not know where she was going, only that she needed help, and the only person in the fortress with the power to command it was the very source of her turmoil. She stumbled into the great hall. It was empty, save for a single figure standing before the massive fireplace, a goblet of wine in his hand, staring into the flames as if seeking answers in the embers. "Lord Theron!" He turned at the sound of her ragged breath. His eyes, those greenish-gray pools that haunted her dreams, widened at the sight of her. Her hair was a wild auburn halo around her pale, freckled face, her dark gray eyes blazing with a raw maternal terror that struck him with the force of a physical blow. The little boy in her arms was frighteningly still. "My lord," she gasped, her voice breaking on the title. "Please, it's my son. The fever. The physician won't come." Theron was across the room in 3 long strides. He didn't look at the child. His gaze was locked on her face, on the tracks of tears she hadn't even felt falling. The sight of her, proud, resilient Meredith, brought to her knees by a fear he could so easily alleviate, shattered the last of his resolve. The war was over. He had lost. "Give him to me," he commanded, his voice not cold but firm, a bedrock of certainty in her crumbling world. She hesitated for only a second, a final vestige of pride before transferring Liam's slight, feverish weight into his arms. The contrast was profound, the Lord, so strong and tall, holding the fragile child with an unexpected, innate gentleness that made her want to weep. "Follow me," he said, and turned, not towards the servants' quarters, but towards the stone staircase that led to the family's private chambers. He led her to a small, tapestried room adjacent to his own solar. A fire roared in the hearth, and the air was warm, clean, and smelled of beeswax and wealth. He laid Liam on the soft fur-covered bed with a care that was mesmerizing to watch. He then turned and bellowed for a servant. When a wide-eyed maid appeared, his orders were swift and absolute. "Fetch the physician, now. Tell him if he values his position, he will come immediately. Then bring hot water, wine, and clean linen." The physician arrived, flustered and fearful, within minutes. While he examined Liam, Theron stood with Meredith by the fire. She was shivering violently from cold, fear, and the sheer surrealism of standing in the heart of his private domain. He stood close, his strong body a shield between her and the door, radiating a heat she could feel through her damp clothes. He did not touch her, but his presence was an embrace. "He will be well," Theron said, his voice low. It was not a question, but a decree. Meredith looked up at him, truly seeing him. The firelight played over the planes of his face, highlighting his chestnut curls, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the surprising, devastating softness in his eyes. The Lord who hated the poor was here, in the heart of his power, defending her child. The contradiction was too much to bear. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice raw with a confusion that mirrored his own. He finally turned to face her fully. The space between them was charged, humming with weeks of suppressed tension, of stolen glances and burning thoughts. "You know why," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her plump, trembling lips. The physician cleared his throat. "The boy will recover, my lord. A strong fever, but the worst has passed. He needs rest, warmth, and this tonic." Relief washed over Meredith so powerfully her knees buckled. Theron's arm shot out, catching her around the waist, pulling her slender body flush against his strong, solid frame. Her head fell against his chest, her forehead resting on the fine wool of his tunic. She could feel the frantic, galloping beat of his heart, a wild drum matching her own. For a long, silent moment they stood like that, in the firelit room, his arms around her, her body molded to his. It was not a kiss, but it was more intimate. It was a surrender, a confession, a homecoming. Slowly, he drew back, his hands coming up to cup her face. His thumbs, surprisingly gentle, brushed away the remnants of her tears, tracing the constellation of freckles across her cheeks. His greenish-gray eyes were dark with an emotion she had never seen in them before. Not contempt, not respect, but a pure, unadulterated, and desperate want. The last of his control, frayed to a single taut thread, finally snapped. He lowered his head and captured her mouth with his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, a furious culmination of weeks of denial and searing frustration. It was the taste of salt from her tears, and the warmth of his breath, and the shocking, perfect fit of their mouths. It was a kiss that held all his anger, at her, at himself, at the world that made this forbidden. For a breathtaking moment, Meredith was lost in it. Her hands coming up, not to push him away, but to clutch at the front of his tunic, holding on as the world fell away, and then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He pulled back as if scorched, his eyes flying open wide with horror. What had he done? He had not just crossed a line, he had obliterated it. He saw the stunned confusion on her face, the swollen lips, the heaving chest, and a wave of self-loathing so profound it choked him. This was not the action of a lord, but of a man ruled by base instinct. He had taken advantage of her vulnerability, her gratitude. He had become everything he professed to despise. "Get out," he rasped, the words torn from him, laced with a venom directed entirely inward. He took a large step back, putting a physical chasm between them. Take your son and get out of my sight." The words were a physical slap. The warmth of the moment vanished, replaced by an icy shame. Meredith stared at him, the ghost of his kiss still burning on her lips, her body cold where his heat had been. Without a word, her own pride returning as a shield, she gathered a sleeping Liam into her arms. "Return to the storeroom," he added, turning his back to her, his voice once more the cold, impersonal tone of the lord of the manor. "You will not speak of this." She fled, the taste of him and the sting of his rejection a confusing, painful cocktail in her heart. Theron stood alone, listening to her retreating footsteps. He poured a full goblet of wine with a trembling hand and drained it in one go, but it did nothing to quench the fire she had ignited. He had kissed her, and in doing so he had finally, completely and irrevocably surrendered. The knowledge was a torture. He had pushed her away to regain control, but he knew with a sickening certainty that he had only succeeded in losing himself more completely. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one now raging within him. The silence in the storeroom was a physical weight, broken only by the ragged rhythm of Meredith's breathing and the soft, even breaths of her sleeping son. The ghost of Theron's kiss was a brand on her lips, a searing contradiction to the icy dismissal that had followed. One moment his arms had been a sanctuary, his mouth a desperate confession. The next he had looked at her with pure horror, casting her out as if she were a contagion. Shame and a bewildering, treacherous thrill warred within her. He had kissed her with the fury of a man possessed, and she, God help her, had kissed him back. In the solar above, Theron was drowning. He drained a second goblet of wine, but it failed to erase the taste of her, of salt and lavender and something uniquely, essentially Meredith. He paced the length of the room, his large frame taut with a restless, furious energy. He had committed the ultimate folly. He had not only allowed a commoner to breach his defenses, he had actively pulled her inside, and then, in a fit of cowardice, thrown her back into the moat. The memory of her stunned, wounded eyes haunted him. He had seen the brief flare of answering passion before he'd extinguished it with his cruelty. He was a wretch. The following days were an exquisite torture. A new frigid formality descended between them, thicker and more impenetrable than the first. Meredith kept her head down, her movements in the kitchen mechanical, her gaze permanently averted. She spoke to no one unless necessary, retreating into a shell of quiet dignity that was more painful to witness than any tears. Theron, in turn, became a specter of his former self. He buried himself in estate business, riding out for days at a time, his temper shorter, his presence more forbidding than ever. The great hall felt colder when he was in it. He could not escape her. He saw her in the way the morning light fell on the stone floor of the hall, in the steam rising from a pot of broth, in the quiet laughter of a servant that was so unlike her own silent resilience. The memory of her slender body against his, the feel of her tears on his skin, the softness of her lips. It was a constant, maddening echo. His hatred for the lower class, once a comfortable, righteous creed, now felt like a lie he had told himself. He didn't hate them. He was terrified of what one of them had made him feel. A week after the kiss, he found himself standing at the door of the storeroom late at night. He didn't know how he'd gotten there. The keep was asleep. From within, he heard a sound that froze his blood. A quiet, broken sob quickly stifled. It was a sound of utter despair, the sound of a woman who had reached the end of her strength. It was a far cry from the defiant woman in the mud, or the terrified mother in his hall. This was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief, and he was its cause. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open. Meredith was sitting on the pallet by the banked-down hearth, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with the effort of containing her tears. She looked up, startled, her dark gray eyes wide and swimming with moisture in the dim light, her fair skin blotchy. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the lord in the doorway and the weeping widow on the floor. "Why are you crying?" His voice was rough, stripped of its usual authority. She wiped her face hastily with her sleeve, her pride reasserting itself even in her despair. "Why do you care, my lord? I asked you a question." He took a step into the small, cramped space, feeling like a giant in a doll's house. A bitter, broken laugh escaped her. "Why? Because you have shown me a glimpse of kindness only to prove it was a lie. Because you make me feel Things I have no right to feel. Because I am trapped, my lord. Trapped in your keep, trapped by my station, and now trapped by the memory of... She trailed off, her gaze dropping to his mouth before flitting away in shame. The memory of what? He pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needed to hear her say it. You know what? She whispered fiercely, her eyes flashing. You kissed me. And I let you. I wanted you to. And for that moment, I forgot who I was. I forgot who you were. And then you made me remember. You always make me remember. Her words were a balm and a lash. She had wanted it. She had felt it too. This wasn't a one-sided madness. I sent you away because I am a coward, he said, the admission torn from a deep, hidden place. He took another step closer until he was standing over her. I have spent my life building walls, Meredith. Walls of stone, walls of pride. You looked at them and saw not a fortress but a prison. You walked through them as if they were mist. It terrified me. So you punish me for your fear? She asked, her voice trembling. I am punishing myself, he corrected her, his voice low and fervent. He knelt down before her, bringing his eyes level with hers. The gesture was one of such profound humility that she caught her breath. I thought I hated the poor for their weakness, but I see now I hated them for their freedom. The freedom to feel, to love, to grieve, without calculating the cost to their name or their title. You have shown me that. You, with your fierce love for your children, your unbreakable will, your mind that puts my own to shame. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, not touching. A question. When I kissed you, it was not an act of a lord. It was the act of a man who was drowning and found you were the only air. I pushed you away because I was ashamed of my own need. Tears welled in her mesmerizing eyes again, but they were different now. They were tears of understanding, of a shared pain. And what do you feel now, Theron? She whispered, daring to use his name. The sound of it on her lips shattered him. Now, he said, his voice raw with emotion, I feel only that I was a fool. That I would tear down every stone of this keep with my bare hands, if it meant I could hold you again without shame. He finally bridged the gap, his strong, calloused hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking away a tear. It was an anchor, a promise. Marry me, Meredith. The words hung in the small, fire-lit room, simple and impossible. She stared at him, utterly stunned, her mind refusing to grasp it. You cannot mean that, she breathed. The scandal. Your position. I have never meant anything more in my life, he said, his greenish-gray eyes blazing with a conviction that brooked no argument. I do not offer you a place as my mistress. I offer you my name, my title, my heart, a future as my wife and as a mother to your sons. Let me protect you. Let me love you. Not as a lord loves a servant, but as a man loves a woman. Always. It was everything she had ever dared to dream and nothing she had ever allowed herself to want. The practical world screamed its objections, the outrage, the isolation, the sheer impossibility. But the woman in her, the one who had seen the gentleness in his hands as he held her sick child, who had felt the devastating truth of his kiss, who saw the vulnerable, honorable man kneeling before her now, could only see one path. A slow, radiant smile broke through her tears, transforming her face. It was the first true unburdened smile he had ever seen from her, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. Yes, she whispered. The word was soft, but it held the power of a vow. Yes, Theron. A sound, half sob, half laugh escaped him. He surged forward, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her from the pallet and into his lap, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her auburn hair, inhaling her scent, feeling the slender strength of her body melt against his. Say it again, he murmured against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, she repeated, her arms winding around his neck, her fingers tangling in his chestnut curls. I will marry you. He drew back then, his hands framing her face, his eyes drinking in every detail, the freckles on her nose, the dark pools of her eyes, her plump, beautiful lips. This time, there was no desperation, no fury, only a slow building wave of pure, unadulterated love and need. He lowered his mouth to hers. This kiss was different. It was not a claiming, but a communion. It was deep, searching, and infinitely passionate. It was a kiss that held weeks of pent-up longing, of unspoken words, of battles fought and won. It was gentle and demanding all at once, a silent promise of a lifetime of such kisses. Meredith met him with equal fervor, her soul opening to his. All fear and doubt burned away in the heat of their connection. Her hand slid from his hair to his shoulders, feeling the powerful muscles there, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, foreheads resting together, their hearts beating a single, frantic rhythm. "I love you, Meredith," he breathed, the words feeling more right than any he had ever spoken. "And I love you." "Theron," she answered, the truth of it shining in her gray eyes. He stood, lifting her effortlessly in his arms. "You are not spending another night in this storeroom," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You are coming to my chambers. Our chambers." He carried her out of the storeroom, through the silent sleeping keep and up to the Lord's tower. He laid her on the large bed, and then he simply held her, their bodies entwined, fully clothed, finding a peace both had been searching for their entire lives. The storm had passed. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the moors. But inside, in the sanctuary of each other's arms, Theron and Meredith had finally built a fortress of their own, one that no society or scorn could ever breach. It was a beginning, forged in conflict and sealed with a passion that promised to burn for a lifetime. Subscribe to Whispers of Old England, where even the coldest heart can be thawed, and the most forbidden love can build a kingdom of its own.